Let me talk to you for a moment. Just you and me, like we're sitting side by side, not on a screen, not in a comment section, not in a place where you have to pretend you're confident. Because if you're honest, there's a part of you that's tired of doing everything right, tired of being told to just be emotionally available, tired of opening up, communicating clearly, showing care, only to watch attraction fade instead of grow. And the worst part, you don't even know when it starts going wrong. You just feel it. She replies slower. She seems distant, but says she's fine. She still talks to you, but she doesn't lean into you anymore. And you start asking yourself the question no man wants to admit out loud: what am I doing wrong if I'm doing exactly what I was told? That question, that quiet self-doubt, is where most men get stuck. Because no one ever told you this. Emotional availability is not the same as emotional attraction. And for many men, confusing the two quietly sabotages their relationships before they even realize it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Men today are encouraged to open up emotionally, but they're rarely taught how to do it without losing their center. So, what starts as honesty slowly turns into over-explaining. What starts as vulnerability turns into emotional exposure without grounding. And instead of creating closeness, it creates pressure. Let me be very clear. This is not about telling men to shut down, suppress feelings, or be cold. That advice is outdated and damaging. But the opposite extreme, being emotionally available too early, too often, and without self-regulation, creates a different problem. It flips the emotional dynamic. Psychologically, attraction grows when there is emotional stability, self-containment, and polarity. When a man centers his emotional world around a woman before his own sense of self is solid, something subtle changes. She doesn't feel unsafe. She doesn't feel disrespected. She just feels less drawn. And that's the part that hurts because you can't argue with a feeling. You might think, but she said she wanted honesty. You might think, but I'm just expressing myself. You might think, isn't communication healthy? Yes, communication is healthy, but attraction is not built on constant emotional transparency. It's built on emotional presence, confidence, and grounded energy. Most men are never taught this distinction. So they mistake emotional availability for emotional leadership. They think being open means sharing everything. They think caring means constantly checking in. They think connection means removing all emotional mystery. But mystery isn't about games. It's about self-containment. And when that's missing, desire quietly leaks out of the relationship. What makes this even more confusing is that women often don't consciously understand this themselves. They feel the shift before they can explain it. So instead of saying, I'm losing attraction, they say things like, I don't know, something just feels off. I think we rush things. I need space. And men are left replaying every conversation, wondering where they messed up. This video exists because that confusion is avoidable, not by becoming less emotional, but by becoming emotionally grounded. Over the next sections, I'm going to break down why emotional availability earns respect but not always desire, how over-explaining feelings creates silent disinterest, the difference between emotional honesty and emotional dumping, what women actually mean when they say open up, and the form of emotional strength that does create attraction. No drama, no manipulation, no games, just clarity. So you stop blaming yourself for following advice that was incomplete. If you've ever felt like being good cost you attraction, stay with me. Because once you understand this, you don't need to change who you are, only how you show it. 1. Why emotional availability gets you respected, but not desired. Let me ask you something, and don't answer out loud, just think. Have you ever been the guy who listened more than anyone else? The guy who showed up, checked in, asked how she was feeling, reassured her, validated her emotions, and somehow still ended up as such a great guy instead of the guy she wants? Yeah, that confusion, that sting, that's exactly where most men lose the plot. Now lean in for a second, because what I'm about to say might bother you, but it will also explain a lot. Being emotionally available does not automatically create attraction. In many cases, it creates comfort, safety, and trust, without desire. And no one explains this to men. You were told, directly or indirectly, that if you're open, kind, emotionally present, and communicative, attraction will naturally follow. So you did what you were taught. You opened up early. You shared your fears. You talked through everything. You made her feelings the center of the connection, and instead of moving closer, she slowly leaned away. Why? Because emotional availability, without emotional strength, changes how you're perceived. Here's the distinction most men never hear. There is a difference between emotional presence and emotional dependence. One feels grounded, the other feels heavy. From a psychological perspective, attraction relies on polarity, a sense that two people are emotionally distinct, not fused. When a man offers emotional access before he's emotionally anchored in himself, the interaction shifts. You stop feeling like someone she's discovering and start feeling like someone who needs to be understood. Let me put it simply. When you make your inner world immediately available, explained, and adjustable to her reactions, you unintentionally communicate, "I need this connection to work." And that pressure, however subtle, kills desire. This isn't about women being cruel or manipulative. It's about human nervous systems. Research in attachment psychology shows that people feel most attraction when the other person appears secure, not when they appear overinvested. Security doesn't mean silence. It means self-containment. Ask yourself this honestly. When you share your emotions, are you sharing because you're grounded or because you're hoping it brings reassurance back to you? Most men don't notice when the shift happens. They think they're being real. But what's being felt on the other side is emotional urgency, and urgency repels. Here's the part that really trips men up. Women often say they want emotional availability, but what they respond to is emotional capacity. Capacity means you can feel deeply without losing your center. You can express emotion without asking for permission. You can listen without absorbing. You can care without chasing outcome. That's very different from emotional availability that looks like explaining yourself too early, over-clarifying your intentions, processing every feeling out loud, making her reactions your emotional compass. When that happens, desire doesn't disappear dramatically. It fades quietly. She still likes you. She still respects you. She just doesn't lean forward anymore. And here's the controversial truth most men need to hear. Respect without polarity feels platonic. So if you've been confused, if you've thought, "I did everything right," you didn't do anything wrong. You just skipped the part where emotional availability is built on emotional self-sufficiency first. In the next section, we're going to talk about something even more uncomfortable: how over-explaining your feelings, something you were told is healthy, can silently trigger disinterest without you ever realizing it. And once you see it, you won't unsee it. 2. How over-explaining your feelings triggers silent disinterest. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When you explain your feelings to a woman, are you explaining them because you understand them, or because you want her to understand you so the connection feels safer? That difference matters more than you think. Most men believe clarity creates closeness, so when something feels uncertain, they talk more. When tension shows up, they explain more. When they sense distance, they try to fix it with communication. On paper, that sounds healthy. In real life, it often does the opposite. Here's why. Over-explaining your feelings shifts the emotional balance from presence to justification. Instead of being grounded, you're narrating yourself. Instead of letting your actions and energy speak, you're asking to be understood. And psychologically, that creates friction. Not because women dislike emotions, but because attraction responds to emotional stability, not emotional processing in real time. Think about this. When you repeatedly explain why you feel the way you do, what you meant, what you're afraid of losing, how much you care, how serious you are, you unintentionally communicate something beneath the words, "I'm trying to secure this." That subtext is felt long before it's consciously noticed. Research in interpersonal psychology shows that attraction weakens when one person appears to be monitoring the relationship instead of inhabiting it. Oververbalization signals vigilance, not confidence, and vigilance feels anxious, even when spoken calmly. This is where many men get confused. They think, "I'm just being honest. I'm just communicating. I'm just making sure we're on the same page. But emotional attraction doesn't grow through constant alignment talks. It grows through emotional containment. Let me give you a simple example. A grounded man notices tension. He doesn't panic. He doesn't rush to explain himself. He stays present, curious, and centered. A man who over-explains notices tension and immediately tries to remove it with words. He talks at the feeling instead of allowing it to resolve. That's the difference. One creates safety and desire. The other creates reassurance without polarity. And here's the hard part to hear. When you over-explain, you remove emotional space. And attraction needs space. Not distance, not coldness, space. Space allows curiosity. Space allows longing. Space allows her nervous system to lean towards you instead of being pulled. When everything is explained, processed, and laid out, there's nothing left to feel. That's when women say things like, "I don't know why, but it feels different." "You're great, but something's missing." "I just don't feel that spark anymore." And men are left confused because nothing bad happened. No fight, no betrayal, just a slow emotional flattening. Here's the controversial truth. You can be emotionally honest and still keep your emotional center private. Privacy is not dishonesty. Privacy is strength. You don't need to narrate every feeling to be authentic. You don't need to explain your depth to prove it exists. In fact, the more grounded you are in your emotions, the less you need to talk about them. That's what confidence looks like emotionally. So if you recognize yourself here, if you've been explaining instead of embodying, this isn't a failure, it's a habit, and habits can change. In the next section, we're going to draw a line most men never see. The difference between emotional honesty and emotional dumping, and why crossing that line silently erodes attraction even when intentions are good. 3. Emotional honesty versus emotional dumping. Most men confuse this. I'm going to say something gently, but very clearly. Most men who say, "I'm just being emotionally honest," are actually emotionally unregulated in that moment. And I don't say that to shame you. I say it because this misunderstanding is costing men attraction every single day. Here's the hard truth. Emotional honesty is about ownership. Emotional dumping is about relief. They feel similar to the person doing them, but they feel completely different to the person receiving them. Emotional honesty sounds like, "I noticed this feeling come up and I've thought about it." Emotional dumping sounds like, "I feel overwhelmed right now and I need you to understand it so I feel better." See the difference? One comes from self-awareness. The other comes from emotional overflow. And here's where I'm going to challenge you a little. If you're processing your emotions out loud in real time with a woman you're trying to attract, you're asking her nervous system to hold weight that isn't hers. That doesn't feel intimate. It feels demanding. From a psychological standpoint, attraction thrives when emotional expression is paired with self-regulation. When expression replaces regulation, the dynamic shifts. Instead of feeling like she's with a man who can hold his inner world, she feels like she's inside it. And that's exhausting. Let me slow this down, because this part matters. Women are drawn to men who can feel deeply, experience stress, encounter doubt, face uncertainty, without collapsing emotionally or outsourcing stability. That doesn't mean you never share. It means you don't spill. Here's the mistake many men make. They confuse vulnerability with exposure. They think, if I show her everything I'm feeling, she'll feel closer. But closeness doesn't come from volume. It comes from containment. When you repeatedly unload fears, insecurities, confusion, or emotional chaos without having processed it first, what she feels isn't trust, it's imbalance. And imbalance kills polarity. Now let me be honest with you. Some of you are using emotional openness as a shortcut to connection. Instead of building attraction through grounded presence, leadership, and consistency, you're trying to talk intimacy into existence. That's not connection. That's pressure. And pressure, even emotional pressure, pushes people away. This is the part where I need you to wake up a little. If every strong emotion you have immediately goes to her, you're not being vulnerable. You're being dependent. That's not strength. That's avoidance of self-soothing. Here's the advice part. Listen carefully. Before you share an emotion, ask yourself, Have I understood this feeling myself? Am I sharing from clarity or from overwhelm? Am I grounded right now, or am I hoping she grounds me? If the answer is the last one, pause. Regulate first, reflect first, stabilize first, then share from steadiness. That's emotional honesty. Because a man who can say, I felt this, I sat with it, and here's what I realized, feels completely different from a man who says, I'm feeling this right now, and I don't know what to do with it. One creates respect and desire. The other creates concern. And concern is not attraction. In the next section, we're going to talk about something that surprises most men. Why women don't actually want men to be vulnerable in the way men think they do, and what they're really responding to instead. 4. Why women don't ask men to be vulnerable the way men think. Let me clear up one of the biggest misunderstandings in modern dating. And I want you to listen carefully, because this is where a lot of men quietly sabotage themselves. When women say, I want you to be vulnerable, they are not asking you to emotionally unload. They're not asking you to narrate every insecurity. They're not asking you to process confusion in real time. And they're definitely not asking you to hand them responsibility for your emotional stability. What they're asking for is something much subtler. They're asking for emotional access without emotional collapse. But men often hear that request literally and then overcorrect. They think vulnerability means sharing fears early, exposing wounds before trust is built, admitting uncertainty, repeatedly talking through every emotional fluctuation, and then they're shocked when attraction drops. Here's why. From a psychological perspective, vulnerability is attractive only when it's framed by strength. When strength is missing, vulnerability feels like burden. Women are biologically and emotionally wired to attune to emotional stability, not perfection, stability. When vulnerability comes from a place of grounded selfhood, it deepens connection. When it comes from emotional reliance, it triggers distance. Let me make this very simple. A man who says, I went through something hard, it shaped me, I learned from it, feels solid. A man who says, I'm still struggling with this and I don't really know who I am without this relationship, feels unstable. Same emotion, completely different impact. This is where men get confused because women often do respond warmly at first. They listen, they empathize, they care. But care is not attraction. And over time, her nervous system starts doing something you can't talk your way out of. It starts protecting itself. She doesn't pull away because you were honest. She pulls away because the honesty didn't come with emotional leadership. Here's the uncomfortable part. Women don't want to be the emotional container for a man they're trying to feel desire for. That role shifts the dynamic from romantic to caretaking, and caretaking kills polarity. This is why you'll hear women say things like, I want a man who's open, but also strong. I want depth, but I still want to feel held. Held doesn't mean emotionally managed. It means your emotions don't spill into the relationship in a way that requires constant reassurance. True vulnerability is selective. It's timed. It's integrated. It says, I trust myself with my emotions, and I trust you enough to share what's already been processed. That feels safe. That feels mature. That feels attractive. What doesn't feel attractive is emotional exposure without grounding. And I need to say this clearly because men rarely hear it. Being emotionally open does not mean being emotionally transparent at all times. Transparency without regulation is not intimacy. It's overwhelm. So if you've been confused, if you felt like you did exactly what women asked and still lost attraction, this is why. You didn't fail at vulnerability. You misunderstood its form. In the next section, I'm going to show you what actually works. The real form of emotional strength women respond to. Not silence, not emotional distance, and not oversharing. 5. The real form of emotional strength women respond to. At this point, some of you might be thinking, so what do you actually want from us? And that's a fair question, because if being emotionally available backfires and being emotionally closed is unhealthy, what's left? Here's the answer most men don't expect. The emotional strength women respond to is self-regulated presence. not silence, not mystery games, not emotional distance, presence. Presence means you are emotionally there without being emotionally reactive. It means you feel things fully, but you don't leak them everywhere. From a psychological standpoint, this is called emotional containment. It's the ability to experience emotions without immediately discharging them onto someone else. And this is where attraction lives. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. A grounded man doesn't rush to explain himself when tension appears. He notices it. He stays calm. He remains curious instead of defensive. He doesn't need to convince her of his value because he feels it internally. When something bothers him, he doesn't suppress it, but he also doesn't unload it impulsively. He says things like, "I noticed something didn't sit right with me. I took some time and here's what I realized." That sentence alone communicates strength. Why? Because it shows self-awareness, emotional patience, internal leadership. And leadership, emotional leadership, is deeply attractive. Here's what many men miss. Attraction isn't built on how much you share. It's built on how you hold yourself while sharing. When you're emotionally grounded, you don't chase reassurance. You don't over-explain. You don't fear silence. You trust that your presence speaks louder than your processing. And that trust changes how you're felt. Women feel safe and drawn to men who can sit with discomfort without panicking, allow emotions to pass without dramatizing them, express feelings without asking to be rescued. That combination creates polarity. Now let me gently call something out. Some men use emotional availability as a way to be chosen. They think, if I show her how much I care, she won't leave. But attraction doesn't come from proving care. It comes from being centered whether someone stays or goes. That's the wake-up moment. Because when your emotional stability doesn't depend on her response, your presence becomes powerful. Not cold, not detached, powerful. This is why emotionally strong men don't need to dominate conversations with feelings. They don't need to constantly clarify intentions. They don't need to secure the connection with words. They trust themselves. And trust, self-trust, is felt instantly. So here's the shift I want you to make. Instead of asking, how can I be more emotionally available? Ask, how can I become emotionally anchored in myself first? That's where attraction grows, not from hiding who you are, but from being rooted in it. Let me leave you with a statement that might feel uncomfortable, but it's honest. Most men don't lose attraction because they lack emotions. They lose attraction because they offer emotions before they offer stability. And that's not something anyone teaches you. You were told to open up, to communicate, to be emotionally available. But no one told you that emotional availability without grounding feels like pressure, not intimacy. Here's the controversial truth. A woman doesn't fall deeper for a man because he needs her to understand him. She leans in when she feels his emotional world is already held by him. That doesn't mean you become distant. It means you become rooted. When you stop outsourcing your emotional center, something shifts. Your presence slows down. Your words carry more weight. Your silence stops feeling awkward. Your emotions stop asking to be managed. And that's when attraction feels effortless. Not because you're hiding who you are, but because you finally trust yourself with who you are. If this video challenged you, I want you to do something important. Go to the comments and tell me honestly, have you ever been emotionally open and still felt overlooked, friend-zoned, or taken for granted? I read those comments and I respond. Because these conversations matter, and you're not the only one navigating this confusion. Remember, you don't need to become less emotional. You need to become emotionally anchored. And once that happens, everything changes.